Hello friends, I will be reading to you guys again today, this time from a different book, but by the same author, 𝗪𝐺. This book is called Breaking the Cycle, Unlocking the Code to Healthy, Liberated Love. For those of you who particularly resonate with what I'll be reading today, I will be leaving a link to her website down in the description box below because we love to share resources made by other neurodivergent folks for neurodivergent folks. But with that being said, get comfortable, whatever that means to you. Grab yourself a coffee, grab yourself a tea, grab yourself your little heating pad, get all cozy, and let me read to you. This guidebook is structured as follows. It begins with providing a clear explanation of the overarching concepts and mechanics at play. The majority of the work is then dedicated to practical application, featuring a detailed breakdown of specific relational dynamics. Each dynamic is clearly labeled and systematically explored, offering actionable insights and guidance for working through them effectively. Let's take a look at some common relationship patterns to give an example of how these play out in real time. Then we'll come back after for some reinforcing elements and vision going forward. Repeatedly attracting emotionally unavailable partners. This pattern is one of the most common, and for good reason. It runs on a frequency structure that has been deeply reinforced both personally and collectively. Emotional unavailability is not just about the other person's behavior. It is about the underlying mechanics that make it appealing, familiar, or even addictive. The real pattern is not them being unavailable. It is you engaging with unavailability as if it was worth pursuing. So why does this pattern repeat? If someone's distance, inconsistency, or avoidance triggers something in you, the charge isn't coming from them. It's coming from the part of you that has learned to associate emotional pursuit with love. The cycle begins when availability feels less interesting than instability, when attention that must be earned feels more valuable than what is freely given. This is why relationships where love is stable, mutual, and present often feel unfamiliar or unexciting at first. It is not because they lack depth, it is because they do not activate the old emotional pathways that equate longing with meaning. This pattern is often rooted in early experiences where love was inconsistent, conditional, or tied to performance. If love had to be earned in childhood, or if emotional presence was given and taken away unpredictably, that becomes the reference point for connection. This is why emotional unavailability doesn't just look like people who won't commit. It can also show up in people who are inconsistent with affection, people who engage intensely and then withdraw, or people who keep you close enough to maintain an emotional charge but never fully present enough to create stability. The key to realization here is that attraction to emotional unavailability is not a flaw or a failure. It is a learned response that can be unlearned. The frequency that sustains this dynamic will continue running until it is no longer engaged with. So how do we collapse the pattern? First, you have to recognize the emotional hook. The strongest part of the pattern is the initial attraction. There is a reason why emotionally unavailable people feel more compelling at first. There is a frequency in play that creates an internal sense of pursuit, challenge, or anticipation. When that energy is present, pause, ask yourself, am I drawn to this person because of who they are or because they are activating something unresolved in me? The answer is usually found in how much mental space they are taking up after the first interaction. If someone's attention or lack of it occupies your thoughts more than it should, you are likely engaging with a charge of unavailability rather than a genuine connection. Number 2, stop engaging with partial presence. Emotional unavailability only functions as a pattern when there is participation in it. The cycle only runs when you stay in the space of waiting for them to commit, waiting for them to be consistent, waiting for them to finally see your value. The moment you stop making excuses for emotional inconsistency and disengage from relationships that require effort to maintain, the frequency loses its anchor. If someone is unavailable, let that be the full truth of the situation, rather than something you hope will change. Shift from potential to presence. Most people who engage in this pattern spend a lot of time projecting into the future, imagining what the relationship could become if only the other person were more available. But the relationship that exists in your mind is not the one happening in reality. The work is in seeing people exactly as they are right now, not as they might be with enough time, love, or patience. Instead of asking, what could this be if they were different? Ask, do I actually feel emotionally safe and met in this connection as it is? If the answer is no, then the relationship is not real. It is a projection of longing, not a foundation of stability. Recognize that if it isn't easy, it isn't aligned. This is the simplest, most difficult shift. Fully accepting that relationships do not have to be hard. The idea that love requires effort or endurance is one of the strongest distortions running in collective consciousness. When this frequency collapses, relationships stop feeling like something you have to earn. The moment you realize that emotional availability is the bare minimum, the charge around unavailability disappears. You don't have to force yourself to stop engaging. It naturally stops feeling compelling. Let the absence of struggle be your new baseline. Once the pattern collapses, you may notice a strange quiet where emotional turmoil used to be. This does not mean love is missing. It means you are no longer operating in the frequency of pursuit. Attraction shifts entirely. The people who once felt exciting no longer hold the same pull, and the ones who offer consistency and presence become more aligned. At first, this new frequency may feel unfamiliar, even boring, but that is only because emotional chaos is no longer in the picture. Once stability becomes your default, the idea of chasing unavailability will feel as foreign as any other outdated pattern you've outgrown. The final shift. Emotional availability becomes the only reality you recognize. When this pattern is fully collapsed, relationships stop feeling like something you have to figure out. You do not have to overanalyze, test, or interpret behavior to gauge whether someone is present. It is clear. If they are available, they're available. If they are not, they are not. And you no longer have any interest in participating in dynamics that require emotional work just to feel secure. This is the turning point where everything changes, where unavailability loses its grip, where longing dissolves, where relationships become simple. Attraction is no longer rooted in tension, but in mutual recognition. Love is not something that has to be earned. It is simply there, present, available, without question. And for the first time, it feels like the most natural thing in the world. Always being the one who gives more. This pattern is one of overextension, of showing up, giving, and investing more than what is being reciprocated. It's the pattern of being the one who remembers, the one who tries, the one who carries the weight of the relationship. It often comes with the belief that love is something proven through effort, that if you give enough, care enough, or hold things together long enough, the other person will eventually meet you in the same way. But that moment never fully arrives. The dynamic remains lopsided, and the more you give, the more you reinforce the imbalance. Why this pattern repeats? This is not just about relationships. It is about how you learned to connect. If in childhood love and approval were tied to what you did rather than who you were, then giving becomes the means of securing connection. If emotional safety was unpredictable, you may have learned that the way to keep relationships intact was to be the responsible one, the fixer, the stabilizer. The core belief running beneath this pattern is that if you do not hold things together, everything will fall apart. The result is a cycle where you instinctively step into the role of caretaker, problem solver, or emotional provider, whether or not the other person is meeting you there. This pattern often shows up in relationships with emotionally unavailable people, where the imbalance feels like a challenge to overcome. But it can also appear in friendships, family dynamics, and work relationships. Anywhere that giving becomes a silent contract, one where you offer more than what is given in return, hoping that eventually the balance will correct itself. But it never does, because the foundation of the dynamic is already set in place. You give, they receive. The key realization here is that overgiving is not love. It is a survival response. It is an unconscious strategy to maintain connection, to keep people close, to ensure stability. But real love does not require depletion. The only way to collapse this pattern is to stop engaging with relationships that demand more than they offer without needing to justify, explain, or soften the shift. How to collapse the pattern. Pause before overextending. The first sign of this pattern running is the impulse to step in, to give, to fix, to hold things together before being asked. There is a moment where you feel the pull to do something. Send the message first, check in on someone who has not checked in on you, adjust your behavior to make someone else more comfortable. Pause here. Ask yourself, am I giving because I genuinely want to, or because I'm afraid of what happens if I don't? If the answer carries any tension, any fear of disconnection, that is the signal to step back. Stop filling in the gaps. One of the strongest reinforcement of this pattern is compensating for the lack of reciprocity. When someone is inconsistent, forgetful, or disengaged, you fill in the space, reminding them, accommodating them, keeping the connection intact, even when they are not contributing equally. Stop doing this. Let the space exist. If you stop initiating, what happens? If you do not reach out, do they? If you do not make the plans, do they ever happen? Instead of trying to force balance where there is none, allow the reality of the relationship to reveal itself. Let silence be an answer. If someone does not reciprocate your effort, do nothing. If you constantly check in on a friend but they never check in on you, stop initiating. If you are always the one adjusting in a relationship to make things work, stop adjusting. Do not send a final message explaining why you are stepping back. Do not try to get them to see the imbalance. Just allow the absence of your energy speak for itself. People who value you will notice. People who only benefited from the imbalance will not. And that is the clearest answer you can ask for. Recognize where you have been giving to be chosen. Much of the overgiving pattern comes from the subconscious belief that effort is what makes you worthy of love, that if you do more, you will be appreciated more, that if you hold everything together, the other person will eventually realize your value. But love is not earned through effort. If someone does not see your value when you are at rest, when you are simply existing without overcompensating, then they were never aligned with you to begin with. The most direct way to break this pattern is to stop proving your worth through action and allow it to stand on its own. If it feels like work, it's not mutual. Relationships do not have to be exhausting. They do not have to be something you constantly manage. If you feel drained after engaging with someone, if the relationship requires constant effort to function, it is not an equal exchange. A balanced connection does not leave you questioning whether you are giving too much or receiving too little. If you have to ask, the imbalance is already there. The more you step back from relationships that require your energy but do not replenish it, the more space you create for the ones that do. When this pattern fully collapses, you will notice that relationships feel lighter. You no longer feel the urge to check in on people who never check in on you. You no longer take responsibility for dynamics that were never fully reciprocal. You no longer feel the need to explain your value, prove your worth, or earn your place in someone's life. Relationships become effortless because they are no longer being carried by one-sided effort. The moment you stop engaging in the pattern stops appearing in your reality. And what remains are only those who are truly aligned with you all along. Being drawn to relationships that have highs and lows. This pattern is built on emotional intensity. It's the kind of relationships that feels electric, magnetic, until it crashes. It thrives on extreme contrast. Deep connection followed by withdrawal, emotional closeness followed by distance, affection followed by avoidance. It can make other relationships feel dull in comparison because the unpredictability creates a rush, an addictive cycle of pursuit and relief. The stronger the tension, the harder it is to break. Why this pattern repeats? Push-pull dynamics are fueled by intermittent reinforcement, the same mechanism that makes gambling addictive. The brain wires itself to chase something that is only occasionally rewarded. If someone gives you love, then pulls away, the moments of closeness feels more meaningful because they were scarce. The withdrawal increases desire, which makes the return feel euphoric. The cycle repeats, strengthening the bond each time. This is not just psychological, it's energetic. If love was unpredictable in childhood, if connection was inconsistent, if affection had to be earned, then stability may not register as real. The nervous system equates emotional turbulence with depth. The body associates longing with love. The result is a pattern where chaos is misinterpreted as passion, and relationships that lack emotional tension feel uninteresting and boring. The key realization here is that this is not love, it is a loop. The charge you feel is not proof of a deep connection. It is the effect of being caught in an energetic cycle that thrives on instability. The moment you stop engaging, the pattern collapses, and love no longer feels like a battle. How to collapse the pattern? Recognize that the high is just a reaction to the low. The emotional intensity does not mean the connection is special. It means the nervous system is dysregulated. If someone withdraws and then returns, the feeling of relief is not love. It is the temporary end of emotional starvation. If absence makes you feel more attached, that is not love. That is addiction to inconsistency. Recognizing this is what allows the pattern to stop feeling compelling. Detach from the urgency to reconnect. When the push-pull cycle is active, there is always a moment where you feel the need to reach out, explain yourself, fix things, or reignite the connection. Do not act on this impulse. Sit with the discomfort. Notice the emotional withdrawal symptoms. Let the cycle break by not feeding it. If someone is used to you always chasing when they pull away, the moment you stop, the entire structure destabilizes. Let emotional stability feel normal, not boring. If emotionally stable relationships feel uninteresting, ask yourself, is it boring or is it just unfamiliar? Emotional chaos is addictive because it creates spikes of intensity, but intensity is not intimacy. Passion does not require pain. If you have been conditioned to equate love with struggle, it will take time to recalibrate what healthy connection actually feels like. The more you expose yourself to relationships that are steady, the more your nervous system adjusts, and the less pull you will feel towards dynamics that drain you. Refuse to play the game. Push-pull cycles only work if both people engage. If someone distances themselves expecting you to chase, do nothing. If they come back expecting the same cycle, respond differently. Say no. Set a boundary. Act from a place of clarity instead of emotional reactivity. When the expected response is not given, the loop stops functioning. It may provoke a reaction. Withdrawers may test harder, pushers may escalate, but if you hold still, the pattern collapses. If someone only loves you in their absence, let them stay gone. Push-pull relationships often involve a partner who comes back only when they sense you moving on. They resurface with just enough effort to reignite the cycle, but never enough to change the pattern. This shift happens when you stop responding to the return. If someone is only affectionate after creating distance, if they only seem to care when you are no longer available, this is not love, it is control. If their presence is only activated by your absence, let them remain absent. When this pattern collapses, relationships stop feeling like something that needs to be secured, chased, or recovered. The longing disappears, the attraction toward instability dissolves. Love no longer feels like a battle. The absence of emotional highs and lows may feel strange at first, but what replaces it is something that was always meant to be there: peace. Relationships become simple, presence is enough, and love is no longer something you have to fight for. It is something that is just there, without question, without tension, without ever needing to be earned. Repeated betrayal, abandonment, or being let down. This pattern creates relationships where trust is unstable, where people leave when you need them most, where promises are broken, and where you are left carrying the weight of disappointment. It often feels like the same cycle repeating, opening up, believing in someone only for them to disappear, betray you, or prove unreliable. The deeper the wound, the more inevitable it seems. Like no matter what, people eventually show you that they cannot be counted on. Why this pattern repeats? This is a frequency structure that reinforces itself. If you expect to be abandoned, betrayed, or let down, your energy will unconsciously orient toward people who confirm that expectation. It's not conscious. It's an ingrained template of relational instability that feels familiar, even when it's painful. This often originates from early life experiences where trust was not stable. It may come from parental dynamics where care was conditional, where love came with risk, where attachments were repeatedly severed. It may also come from generational imprints, ancestral trauma where loss, exile, or betrayal were significant themes. If betrayal or abandonment is woven into your lineage, the pattern is not just personal. It is an energetic structure that has been passed down. At its core, this pattern is asking for the release of anticipatory loss. When trust is broken enough times, the body begins to expect it, preparing for it even before it happens. But expectation creates confirmation. If you are scanning for signs of dishonesty, distance, or disloyalty, you are already reinforcing the energy of it. The shift happens when you stop seeing loss as inevitable, when trust is no longer something you will assume will be broken. If you expect someone to leave, disappoint, or betray you, you may find yourself testing their loyalty, subconsciously pushing, withdrawing, or challenging them to prove that they will stay. This is a protective mechanism, but it often creates the very outcome you fear. Instead of monitoring whether someone will fail you, shift into neutrality. Let them show up however they show up. Stop anticipating failure and let reality play out without interference. Recognize where you withhold. Notice if you preemptively guard yourself in relationships. Do you fully express your needs, or do you downplay them to avoid disappointment? Do you allow yourself to rely on others, or do you maintain hyper-independence as a defense? The cycle breaks when you stop relating from a place of self-protection and start engaging from a place of presence, without assuming the worst. Let go of relationships that require hypervigilance. If you feel the need to track someone's energy, wondering if they are pulling away, wondering if they mean what they say, wondering if they will still be there in a month, that is already your answer. Love does not require constant emotional monitoring. If you cannot trust a connection without having to analyze it, that connection is running on instability. Step back from relationships where safety is something you have to negotiate. Trust is not something you earn in a relationship where it's absent. Many people in this pattern stay in relationships hoping that over time trust will be built, but trust is not something you convince someone to offer. It is either there or it isn't. If someone has already shown you that they cannot be relied on, do not engage in a long-term effort to teach them trustworthiness. Step away, choose people who do not require that level of energetic work. If someone leaves, let them stay gone. One of the most destructive aspects of this pattern is the tendency to let people return after they have already left. Someone who abandons you and then comes back only when they are ready is not offering love. They are maintaining control. If someone only values you in your absence, let them experience that absence permanently. Every time you let someone return after breaking trust, the cycle reinforces itself. The loop ends when you stop reopening doors that were already closed. When this pattern collapses, loss no longer feels inevitable. You stop expecting abandonment. You stop waiting for betrayal. You stop filtering relationships through a lens of how long until this person disappears. The nervous system calms. Trust is no longer something that feels fragile or temporary. You no longer attract people who require constant reassurance, who come and go at their convenience, who leave damage behind them. Instead, the only relationships that remain are the ones that do not carry the charge of loss. There is no need to test, no need to prove, no need to guard. Trust is not something that is worked for. It is simply there. And when that is the foundation, relationships feel effortless because they no longer hold the weight of past betrayals. What remains is stability, presence, and connection that does not waver, no matter what. Attracting relationships where you feel unseen, unheard, or unimportant. This pattern creates a relationship where you feel invisible. You express yourself, but it doesn't seem to land. You communicate your needs, but they are disregarded. You give effort, but it isn't recognized. There is a deep feeling of being in the background, of being present but not felt, of speaking but not being truly heard. The more you try to make your presence known, the more it feels like you are shouting into the void. This pattern is often tied to early experiences where emotional needs were deprioritized or dismissed. It forms when, as a child, your voice was met with indifference, when your emotions were too big for the environment you grew up in, or when you were conditioned to believe that being low maintenance made you easier to love. If love was given more freely when you were quiet, adaptable, or emotionally self-sufficient, you may have learned that presence is something that must be minimized in order to maintain connection. This can also come from generational conditioning, especially in family lines where suppression was a survival mechanism. If past generations had to stay silent to maintain stability, whether due to cultural expectations, abusive environments, or systematic oppression, this imprint can carry forward as a tendency to shrink in relationships, to downplay emotions, to avoid making waves. At its core, this pattern is asking for self-permission to take up space. It is not just about finding people who see you. It is about fully occupying your own presence so that being overlooked is no longer something you unconsciously align with. Recognize where you have been muting yourself. Feeling unseen often comes with behaviors that reinforce invisibility. Do you soften your opinions to avoid conflict? Do you hesitate before expressing a need, wondering if it's too much? Do you wait for people to ask how you feel instead of stating it outright? These small hesitations create an energetic field where your presence is diminished before it even has the chance to be acknowledged. The shift begins with recognizing where you silence yourself. Stop waiting for recognition. Many people in this pattern stay in relationships hoping to be finally acknowledged, trying to prove their worth through patience and persistence. But waiting for recognition from people who have already shown you they are incapable of seeing you only reinforces the pattern. Instead of hoping someone will suddenly offer the validation they have never given, withdraw your energy. Let their lack of recognition be the answer. Speak without justifying. Express without softening. One of the strongest reinforcements of this pattern is adjusting communication to be easier to receive. This looks like downplaying emotions so they don't seem like a burden, framing needs as suggestions rather than statements, over-explaining thoughts and feelings to ensure they are understood, apologizing for existing too loudly. Start speaking in full weight. Instead of saying, "It's not a big deal, but I was kind of hoping," we could say, "I need this from you." Instead of, "I don't want to bother you, but I was feeling," say, "This is what I feel, and I need to be heard." When you stop filtering yourself through what is most palatable to others, the entire structure of invisibility collapses. Withdraw energy from people who benefit from your silence. Some relationships only function because you are the one who shrinks. These are connections where the balance is maintained by you staying small, where the other person benefits from not having to adjust, listen, or take your needs into account. If the only way a relationship remains intact is by you being quiet, accommodating, or low maintenance, then that is not a relationship. It is a one-sided arrangement. The moment you stop minimizing yourself, the dynamic will either adjust to include you fully or it will fall apart entirely. Either outcome is clearing. The final collapse of this pattern happens when you no longer try to prove your importance. Instead of seeking people who finally see you, you start showing up fully, whether others recognize it or not. The internal reference point shifts from, "Will they acknowledge me?" to, "I acknowledge myself, and that is enough." When this happens, the pull toward relationships where you are overlooked disappears. You are no longer drawn to spaces where you have to fight for recognition because that battle no longer feels relevant. You no longer enter rooms that require you to shrink. When this pattern dissolves, relationships where you feel unseen no longer hold any emotional charge. You stop making excuses for people who don't listen, who don't acknowledge, who don't reciprocate. You stop chasing recognition from those who are unwilling or unable to give it. You no longer second guess whether you are too much or too needy because you are already fully present within yourself. And when that happens, the only people who remain in your life are the ones who are capable of seeing you all along. Feeling drawn to partners who need saving, fixing, or healing. This pattern creates relationships where you step into the role of the healer, the guide, the emotional caretaker. You are drawn to people who are lost, wounded, or struggling, people who seem to need your love in order to change. The dynamic feels meaningful, even spiritual, because it often carries the illusion of deep purpose. If I love them enough, they will heal. But no matter how much you give, no matter how much effort you put in, they either remain stuck in their patterns or they take what you offer and leave. Over time, the cycle becomes draining, yet difficult to escape, because the pattern itself is not about them. It is about the role you have been conditioned to play. This is one of the strongest relational imprints. It often originates in childhood. If you grew up in an environment where a parent was unstable, emotionally unavailable, or struggling, you may have learned that love is something you offer to stabilize others. In homes where emotional care was inconsistent, children often take on the role of the fixer, adapting, smoothing over conflict, taking responsibility for others' well-being. This creates a subconscious belief that love and healing are linked. That to be valuable in a relationship, you must provide emotional labor, guidance, or support. This is also reinforced generationally. Many family lines carry this imprint, especially in those where survival meant putting others first. If past generations were required to overextend, sacrifice, or suppress their own needs in service of others, this conditioning is passed down. The result is a pattern where love is not just a connection, it is a job. At its core, this pattern is asking for the release of relational self-sacrifice, for the understanding that love does not require you to carry someone, fix them, or pull them towards healing. This pattern thrives on the illusion that helping someone is the same as loving them. But love is not effort. Love is not healing work. Love is not something you give to someone so they can evolve. If you feel the pull to save someone, pause and ask yourself, am I loving this person or am I trying to fix them? If the connection is built on effort, you are engaging in labor, not love. One of the strongest reinforcements of this pattern is the belief that if you don't help, they won't heal. This is false. Everyone is responsible for their own growth. If someone is meant to evolve, they will, with or without you. Stop making healing a condition of love. Stop monitoring someone's progress to see if they are changing. Step out of the role of caretaker and let them meet you where you are, rather than you lowering yourself to guide them forward. Stop pouring energy into potential. People in this pattern often fall in love with what could be rather than what is. They see a person's highest self, their unexpressed gifts, their possible evolution. They stay in relationships hoping the person will reach that version of themselves. But love is not about waiting for someone to become who you wish they were. It is about seeing who they are now and deciding if that is aligned. If someone's present version is not compatible with you, let them go. Disengage from people who use their wounds as a weapon. Some people reinforce this pattern because they benefit from it. They may frame their struggles as reasons why they cannot show up for you. They may make their pain a justification for why they cannot give effort, take accountability, or treat you well. If someone's wounds are being used as an excuse for why they cannot meet you in reciprocity, stop engaging. If struggle has been tied to love, ease may feel unfamiliar. Healthy relationships will not require work to sustain. They will not make you feel like you must hold everything together. If a relationship only functions because you are constantly stabilizing the other person, that is not love. It is a one-sided energetic contract. Walk away from dynamics where love is something you must manage. When this pattern collapses, love stops feeling like something that needs to be maintained. It simply exists effortlessly. When this pattern dissolves, you stop attracting people who need to be rescued. You are no longer responsible for who someone becomes. You stop feeling the urge to heal others. You stop equating love with labor. You no longer feel drawn to relationships where you must convince someone to evolve. Instead, you are met by someone who do not need to be saved because they have already chosen healing for themselves. And in that space, love is no longer work, no longer effort, no longer something that requires you to be the catalyst for someone else's growth. It is simply there, reciprocal, whole, and free. If you struggle with letting yourself be loved, this is not just about struggling with intimacy. This is not just about keeping people at a distance. This is about feeling something real staring you in the face and not knowing how to let it in. Love arrives and you freeze. It's there, offered freely, without condition, and instead of leaning into it, you feel uneasy. You may reject it outright, or you may accept it in pieces. Just enough to keep it close, but never enough to fully absorb it. Maybe you intellectualize it. Maybe you question it. Maybe you keep it at arm's length because a part of you still doesn't believe it's safe. Because love, real love, the kind that stays, the kind that doesn't have to be earned, the kind that doesn't expect anything in return, doesn't just feel foreign, feels like a trick. This is not about love itself. This is about what love used to mean. If love once meant pain, then receiving it freely now feels suspicious. If love once meant performance, then being loved for just existing now feels undeserved. If love once meant obligation, then receiving it without a price now feels unsafe. If love once meant abandonment, then accepting it fully now feels like you're setting yourself up for loss. This is not your fault. Your system was wired for survival. And in survival, love was never free. It always came with a risk, a consequence, a condition. Love was something you had to manage, prove yourself worthy of, or protect yourself from. And now, even when love comes in its purest form, it doesn't register as safe. Recognize where you resisted love without realizing it. This pattern does not always show up as outright rejection. Sometimes it's small hesitations that add up to a barrier. Do you deflect compliments, brush off affection, make jokes when someone is being sincere, change the subject when things are getting too deep? These are all forms of refusing to fully receive love. The first shift happens when you stop dismissing what is being freely given. Sit with the discomfort instead of sabotaging. Love feels overwhelming when you're used to deprivation. If you are used to getting scraps, small moments of affection, inconsistent attention, love that had to be worked for, then being fully seen and cherished can feel like too much too soon. When this discomfort arises, do nothing. Do not push the person away. Do not sabotage. Just let yourself feel the unease and stay open anyways. Stop interpreting love as something that needs to be earned. If you were conditioned to work for love, you may feel anxious when someone loves you for simply existing. You may feel like you need to prove yourself worthy, like you need to do something to keep it. But love does not require effort to exist. If someone loves you, let it be true without needing to justify it. Let yourself be loved just as you are, without adding weight to it. Learn to receive without feeling like you owe something back. One of the strongest reinforcements of this pattern is believing that accepting love creates a debt. If in the past love always came with an expectation attached, if kindness had strings, if affection had consequences, you may feel uneasy when someone gives freely. But love is not a transaction. If someone offers love, accept it without reaching for something to give in return. Let it land. Let it exist in its pure form. Let love be safe instead of something to survive. This pattern collapses when you stop seeing love as a risk, a setup, or a future pain point. When you stop assuming love will hurt you, when you stop bracing for the moment it will be taken away, when you let yourself be held, be seen, be cherished, without resistance, without fear, without questioning whether you deserve it, the final shift takes place. Love no longer feels like a test. It feels like home. When this pattern dissolves, you stop treating love like something that needs to be managed. You stop anticipating loss before it happens. You stop waiting for the catch. Love is no longer a future risk or a test of endurance. It is something that finally, for the first time, feels safe in your hands. All right, so I actually damn near read through the entire book. One thing that I've had to say to myself again and again the past 2 years is let them. And I think that's a huge aspect of what this book highlights again and again. Let them. Stop forcing things that are not meant to happen. Stop trying to earn things that are not meant to be kept. Just let it happen. Let them. And with that being said, you guys, I hope this book has helped you either confirm the growth that you are already fostering for yourself, or it's helped give you a good, stable starting point to work off of. The journey is long, but the journey is worth it. You are worth it. Make sure you guys take some time today to what? Drink some water, eat some food, take yourself on a nice walk, stay regulated. I will see you guys on the next one. Take care.